So you're probably thinking, why are you here? But I do work with recruitment quite closely. My background is that I started my career in the private sector. So I worked for PwC and Ernst & Young before moving into the public sector. And for those of you who don't know, British Transport Police is the UK's police service for the railway network. So some of you might not be aware of us. This is relevant to some of the things that I'm going to be discussing. We are the only national police force in the UK, so we cover England, Scotland and Wales. Our headquarters is in Camden, in London. I work and live in Bristol. Our HR centre and recruitment centre is in Birmingham. Our safeguarding unit is in Leeds. Can you see a pattern here? I travel quite a lot, sadly, on the railway network. But again, all of those things are particularly relevant to what I'm going to discuss. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about positive action. Can I just get a sense from the room how many people have actively used positive action as it's defined in the Equality Act in any of their recruitment activities? So just a handful of people. It's interesting. Okay, first of all, I'm going to give you the answer. I have the solution, which is why I've been invited here today. There we go. I think we can all go home. No applause? I worked really hard on that. I'm being a little bit irreverent here. Ultimately, of course, it would be quite easy for us just to say, let's hire lots of more women, let's hire lots more disabled people, let's hire lots more people from a BAME background. But in policing, which is where I work, and I've worked there for nearly 15 years, it's not quite that easy. And there's a number of reasons, and some of those I spoke about in my introduction, about the fact that we are all over the UK, the fact that our headquarters is in London. Interestingly, the question we were just speaking about social mobility, we know, quite honestly, and we can't hide this, that if you want to be promoted, you have to be willing to go to London at some point in your career. Now that's really problematic for us, particularly if we're trying to increase the number of females or ethnic minorities, particularly in those areas of the country, north of England, for example, and Scotland, where actually they are really woefully underrepresented. When it comes to women particularly, and this is a bit of a stereotype, but we found that women aren't necessarily willing to sacrifice that option of potentially settling down and having children and working part-time. We don't allow for that in policing generally. We expect people to work shifts. We expect people to work full-time. We expect people to be able to travel across the country at the drop of a hat. And at the moment, a number of our officers have travelled from all over the country to support the visit from Donald Trump. And we can't have people opting out of that. It's not optional. It's something actually that people are expected to do. So it's a problem. And that's one of the reasons why we really, really rely on using positive action. These are some of the limitations, not all of them, but some of the limitations that we found. Speak about that history of affirmative action. That's a really interesting one. People generally, and we're not just talking about people within the organisation, we're talking about members of the public. Back in the 90s and throughout the 2000s, people were using what was considered affirmative action, ultimately. And it was activity that was designed specifically to increase underrepresented groups. It wasn't, at the time, this was pre-Equality Act, 2010, it was kind of lawful, not really defined in any kind of legislation in any way, but it was justified. And it was justifiable, all of those kind of activities. But it's still in people's mindsets now. When we talk about positive action with our communities, with anyone wanting to join the organisation, their mind, particularly if they're of a certain age, their mind will go straight back to affirmative action and what that was, or what they perceived it to be. It's an unattractive career path, particularly for certain groups. For women particularly, really difficult to attract females into policing. And then if you throw in all of those things that I mentioned earlier about the fact that we're a national police force and you have to be willing to work full time and you have to be able to do shift work, and by the way, you might need to move to London for 4 or 5 years and then you can move back, all of those things put people off. It's not attractive for that reason. We have an experiential progression path, which for those of you who work in that kind of armed service environment or emergency services, you can only get to the top from the bottom. There's no way in at the middle. You start at the bottom and work your way up. And again, for those people who potentially maybe have had a career already, into their 30s and 40s and think, actually, I want to join policing, well, you can't join at a level that might be at the level you were in your previous career. You've got to start at the bottom again. That's particularly unattractive. That means age, experience, progression, it's all tied together. Really difficult for us to kind of get around that. And there have been attempts. The College of Policing, which is the governing body for all police services in the UK, has been working to get campaigns in place for direct entry at certain levels, and particularly Chief Inspector, Superintendent, so very senior ranks, looking to people who have life experience, who've already had quite a substantial and successful career. Limited success, sadly. And I will talk from a British Transport Police perspective. We signed up to this immediately. We thought this is fantastic. This is going to really help us to actually increase representation at senior ranks, where we don't have much representation, we'll be honest. It didn't work for us. We had one candidate who got through the assessment criteria, because it's still a very rigid policing assessment criteria that you have to go through. And that individual chose not to join the organisation once they'd been accepted. Lots of reasons behind that. A lot of that was actually didn't want to move to London. Quite simply, did not want to move to London, did not want to develop their career in that way. So really problematic. Positive action. If I can just talk a little bit about what we've done, really basic things. And I'm not here to tell you all about positive action, what it is. I need much more than 20 minutes to do that. But so these are some of the really basic things that we tried straight away. So we put in place a small team of individuals across the organisation who specifically worked on attracting individuals from underrepresented groups. But what we needed to do, and this is really important, I think, for anyone who's embarking on positive action who might want to use it, is actually to understand where your evidence is for underrepresentation. Because we can assume that we don't have many black and minority ethnic individuals across our force. We can assume that we don't have many females working as police officers. We can assume that there aren't many LGBT people in senior ranks. Actually, that's not necessarily always true. And I think for us, particularly when using positive action, and there's not much case law around positive action as well, other than the Cheshire case, which some of you might be aware of from Cheshire Police earlier this year. So there's not much additional case law for us to go on as to what is and isn't appropriate, how we actually use and apply positive action. But ultimately, the Act is quite specific in saying that you need evidence of underrepresentation. And not only evidence of underrepresentation, but long-standing underrepresentation that you've attempted to address, and that it doesn't matter what you've done, actually hasn't worked. That's how you can apply positive action. So we need to be very careful about actually understanding that as well. Pre-application workshops are really interesting and a really easy way for us to apply Section 158. I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail about the legislation, but there's 2 parts in the Equality Act, Section 158 and Section 159, which covers positive action activity. And the easy way to remember them really is 158 is anything that is about pre-application activity, and 159 is post-application. And 159 generally it includes things like the of equal merit test, where you potentially have 2 candidates who are going through a process. They're both of equal merit through that assessment process, and then you can select the underrepresented person. A bit of a minefield because the legislation itself isn't very clear. It doesn't really define what of equal merit is. It just says of equal merit. So we're left to define that for ourselves, which is really problematic. So we focus most of our activity on pre-application because it's much easier to do. we're just having a conversation on our table actually about anonymised applications. It's something that we've always done, and that's because we don't outsource any of our recruitment processes. We do it all in-house. We've got an in-house recruitment team. And that recruitment team is very well versed on both positive action, legislation around it, what we can and can't do, but also unconscious bias, very well trained on that. And in addition to that, we have an online platform for applications, but then that information, when it's drawn down, removes all of the information that may identify anyone's protected characteristics. So that's all their name, for example, and their diversity information. More problematic when it comes to answers to specific questions, where actually they might have inadvertently given away the area that they grew up, where they went to school, people that they've worked with in the past. All of those kind of things can still give an indication of where that person may have come from, what their social background is, what community they're from, what their ethnicity is. So we still have to be very, very careful, and that's why we don't outsource. That's why we like to do it in-house, and we have lots of checks and balances as well in place to make sure that if I am assessing that application, someone else will assess it again independently after that, just to make sure that my biases haven't been kind of picked up. I want to be very clear about some of the things that work for us, and this isn't to say that they won't work for your organisations, but these particular things actually really worked in order for us to address underrepresentation. And for us, again, when I'm looking at BTP, we very specifically went with ethnicity and gender. They were our biggest gaps in underrepresentation, both throughout the organisation but also at rank, as well as making very clear that we had the evidence to prove that. Almost 100% of our employees, we know what their ethnicity is, we know 100% what their gender is. Very difficult when it comes to sexual orientation and disability for us, because actually we are very much dependent, it's not mandatory, on those individuals telling us who they are. So at the moment, we don't do any positive action work for addressing underrepresentation for sexual orientation, LGBT, or for disability, because actually we have no evidence whatsoever of underrepresentation. Now we can assume, the Act allows us to assume that there might be underrepresentation or to reasonably guess, but actually we would much rather be happier if we had some basis of evidence. And I think the reason for that is around 87% of all of our employees won't tell us anything about their sexual orientation, so it's blank. Now that's quite a large proportion of the workforce to try and apply positive action to. It would be very dangerous for us to do that. And I think, particularly when we look at those people who have told us what their sexual orientation is, it's very clear that senior officers within the organisation are disproportionate from the LGBT community. You'd be surprised. So around 25% of our senior officers, and that's chief inspectors and above, are from the LGBT community. Now, if we were to apply positive action to increase representation, that's not really evidence of underrepresentation to me. That's kind of evidence of the opposite. So we're on very kind of dangerous grounds when we're trying to apply something in law to address an underrepresentation that we actually can't evidence. Interestingly enough, these are some of the things that didn't work for us. And again, it might work for your organisations, it might work for your particular industry, but for us, we went straight away, we went, right, let's go to Grazia magazine. I don't know if there's anyone from Grazia magazine in the room, hopefully not. But let's go to Grazia magazine, let's get this fantastic advert in there. We can show a picture of a woman in uniform, and we can talk about, this is an exciting career path for women, and we can be very explicit. And we got no applications, not a single expression of interest from that recruitment campaign, that advertising campaign that we ran through Grazia. So we were kind of a bit puzzled by this. It's like, well, was it there for a start? So we had a look, yeah, it's definitely there. It definitely says what we wanted to say. Had a look, and then we got some focus groups in. And what we found was that the focus groups were telling us, oh, we didn't think this was for us. We would just pass it to our husbands or boyfriends. Kind of say, look, the police are advertising. Why don't you go and apply for that? It's not really what we were hoping to achieve, in all honesty. But actually we got more male applications in the end from that Grazia advertising and none from females. Interesting, didn't work for us, that specific campaigning, even when we were quite explicit in our imagery about what it was we were trying to sell. The generalised recruitment fairs, and I know there are some people from recruitment fairs here today, so this isn't a slight on you, apologies, but for us it didn't work. It got lost a little bit in the melee, and again for us it was very difficult for us to kind of compete with other police services, which is we're always competing with, much bigger budgets. So we found that didn't really work for us. For us it was the kind of pre-application work that was really important. So, bit of a warning. Are you prepared for this? I even added that animation so that it jumps out at you, you know, like that scene from Jaws. So it's quite scary. What's wrong with this advert? What's wrong? Anyone give me an idea what the problem is? Oh, is there a typo? I didn't notice the typo, but anything else?
Female from a BAME background, not mutually exclusive.
No, that's true. They're not. They're not mutually exclusive. The reason that I've shown you this is the reason why I'm here today is the problem with using positive action and the reaction that positive action can have in the public domain. We put this out at the beginning of the year. And if you read it carefully, what it says is we're recruiting police officers. We're recruiting police officers, quite a basic message. Bit of a mixed kind of rainbow image there going on, different groups. If you look at the wording in the advert itself, are you female from a black or minority ethnic group? Are you interested in becoming a police officer? Come to our next recruitment workshop at 6 p.m, etc. Now, we were quite shocked by the response when we tweeted this out, because what we hadn't realised is that if you notice, and no one's picked up on it, there's no white men on that image. Is that a problem? It certainly was for the public. We had 2,500 responses to that one tweet. 2,500 responses, replies to that particular tweet. Most of which were kind of saying, oh, so as a white man, I can't apply. I don't think it really says that anywhere. You're not recruiting for anyone other than BME or females. Well, actually, we're advertising a workshop. This isn't the recruitment advert. This isn't a come and join us. We had lots of other adverts going on at the same time saying we're open for applications, because we know the majority will be from majority groups. We always get those majority groups. So we don't exclude anyone from application. This was specifically about getting people to a workshop so that we could talk about the things that are barriers for underrepresented groups. We could talk about how to, what is it about applying for police service that is a problem for you. We can talk to you about the reality of what policing is. We can have those one-to-one conversations with individuals, try and convince them that actually it's an attractive thing to do or place to join. But actually, this is what we got. For those of you who can't read it, I remember when British police was regarded as some of the best in the world. That was a long time ago, before they engaged in institutional racism, Sharia support, anti-conservatism, and male-hunting feminism. Interesting, all from that one advert. Come to a workshop, because we want to talk to you about attracting you into policing. Not really sure how they got that from. Quite like the anti-conservatism and male-hunting feminism as well. I don't need to read your racist blog. This is someone who's apparently studied employment law. These were the polite versions. When Tommy Robinson got hold of it and started tweeting it, it got a whole lot more dangerous. Females are fine, apparently, but ethnic minorities, no, we don't want them. Erasing white men. It's an interesting one. Not sure we were able to do that. Not English need apply. not even in English that I can really recognise, sadly, but not English need reply. I'm not sure what the grammar is there. This is the reality of when you try to apply positive action, which is lawful, it's necessary, it complies with the Act, with the elements of the Act specifically. We're not excluding anyone from applying. This is the kind of response that we get. Sadly, and I haven't put it on here, and I was debating whether to tell you or not, because of the sheer volume of negative response, and about 98% of those 2,500 responses were very, very negative or offensive. Because of that, our organisation decided to pull the advert. So 3 days later, and we'd spent all weekend, myself, colleagues from Recruitment, responding to every single response. This is why we're doing it. Here's the information. Look for yourself. This is legal. We've even done a kind of a really basic, easy read version of what positive action is and isn't. Read this. We'll send it to you. Didn't make a difference. Our organisation panicked. Went reputational damage. We don't want to do that. So that would be my warning to you. One of the things that I want to talk to you about a little bit more, and I'm slightly overrunning, apologies, is about how you prepare for this. It's about making sure that everyone signed up to it, what it is, what you're expecting, because we were expecting this. We've been using positive action for 5 years, and we've always had similar kind of responses. This was the most in volume and the most violent that we've ever had, but actually we knew it was coming. So our reaction to that probably wasn't the best. Really, really, really prepare in advance. So I would say get your evidence. I spoke earlier about evidence for positive action. Don't just apply positive action to all groups because you actually assume there might be underrepresentation in your organisation. That won't work. And if anyone challenges you as well, you need to have that evidence back to say, well, actually, look, we've got that long-standing underrepresentation. We've tried everything. It's not working. This is why we're applying positive action. It will help you should any kind of claims of discrimination come through, which we have had, and we've won. So be specific. So which groups are you talking about? Is it ethnicity? Is it BME? Is it LGBT? Is it disability? It could be any of those groups that are underrepresented, but actually be specific about it. Don't just apply it to anyone. Take legal advice. I would always say, I've said if necessary, but I would always take legal advice. This is what we're planning to do. What do you think? Be clear on what you're hoping to achieve, but don't set targets. I think really interestingly enough, a lot of my colleagues, and particularly from some of the Home Office forces, I won't name and shame, but I will talk to you in the break if you want to know who, very kind of quick to kind of say we want 30% BME in our next, don't do that. It really drives perverse behaviour in the organisation. We're just hoping to achieve that target, and then what? What have we done? Have we achieved what we needed to do? Actually, it's more about making sure the organisation is inclusive first, and then applying positive action, doing all of those kind of things so that we know that we sustain that diversity over time. And make sure everyone understands it. Again, going back to that particular example, we weren't even told that the advert was pulled because our marketing team kind of did it on our behalf on the Monday. And when we tried to kind of go, well, where's that? Where are all of our responses from the last 3 days, weekend, sitting up at midnight, responding to emails? Oh, no, we've deleted them all. Oh, okay. That's slightly different. How do we actually explain that to members of the public, why we've done that? And what message does that send? Again, we got loads of the same people coming back saying, I told you it was discrimination. It must have been discrimination, you pulled it. You panicked. It wasn't. It was perfectly lawful, and we were expecting that response, but there were certain individuals within the organisation that panicked. They weren't part of the decision making, and that was my fault, ultimately. We didn't have that discussion in advance to say, this is what we're expecting, don't cut the advert. Really basic. Just explain to people what it is and what it isn't. Even if it's the most offensive response you've ever seen, like some of those, we still went back to them and said, thank you for your comment. This is why we're doing it. This is why it's important. It's really important that we get people on board. They may still never believe you. They may still never actually see this as lawful activity, but it's really important that we explain it to people. And I mentioned earlier about Cheshire. Came at a really bad time for us because it was pretty much exactly around the same time that we were battling with this kind of public reaction to positive action, or what people were describing as positive discrimination, which obviously does not exist. It's not lawful. Positive action. Cheshire were taken to tribunal because they had tried to apply the of equal merit rule to their recruitment campaign. But they had decided, and this is a short summary, that of equal merit meant anyone who passed. In law, it needs to be a little bit more definable than that, I think, and this is what the tribunal found, that ultimately you can't say that everyone who passes either over 60% or 55% is of equal merit to each other. Very, very difficult for you to justify that. But that's ultimately what they did, and the tribunal ruled against them. But again, interestingly enough, the minute that hit, we got exactly the same people come back to us again saying, told you again. You know, you not only removed it because it was unlawful, look at what Cheshire have done. This is exactly what you've done. It isn't. It's completely different. But there will always be those communities that actually aren't interested. They don't believe you. So, to finish off, understand the history of your organisation or your industry. I know, I've worked for policing for 15 years, but I know before that there's always been a traditional underrepresentation for minority groups and females. Can't necessarily say the same about other underrepresented groups. Be clear on whether it's necessary. Sometimes it's quite quick to kind of go, let's apply positive action. Or there's discussions at the moment about we need to apply positive discrimination. I think the lead for the National Police Chiefs Council is actually trying to lobby the government to allow us to positively discriminate. I don't agree with that. I think there's a lot in the Equality Act, in Positive Action 158 and 159 that we can still use, that we haven't used to its best advantage. So I don't think there's ever any room for discrimination, even if it's legalised, in inverted commas. Be specific on what you'd like to achieve and why. Why is this important? Is it important? You know, females in a HR environment, they're disproportionately female. Why is it important that we have proportionate male representation? Don't know, it's worth having that conversation. Is it important? Be prepared to justify those decisions, be brave, be bold, be lawful. For us, very important that we are lawful in everything we're doing. We might be lawfully audacious every now and then, kind of, you know, tiptoeing over that line a little bit, but actually really careful that we are still complying with what we believe the law allows us to do. And don't be put off by trolls, naysayers, and the uninformed. Stay firm. I hope that's been helpful. It is a particularly difficult topic. It's not something that I think I could have explained in 20 minutes, and I have gone considerably over. My sincerest apologies. But I am going to be here all day, so if anyone wants to discuss positive action, please do come and seek me out at some point. Thank you very much.